Welcome to the African Hub for Sustainable Creative Economies interviews with key leaders in the film industry in South Africa. My name is Avril Jaffe. I am the lead investigator for the South African Hub on film and digital media for the African Hub. And I'm really delighted to be here with Dylan Lloyd, who's a production designer. And I'm going to ask Dylan to tell us what his journey into being a production designer looked like and some of the highlights along the way. Welcome, Dylan.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. I'll take it away. Originally I'm from Zimbabwe, was born in Salisbury, and grew up in the independent Zimbabwe, early 70s and 80s. Where I got into art at a very young age, and I studied at the Harare Polytechnic for my tertiary education. I was planning on steering my way towards fine art and becoming, an artist that exhibited in galleries and what have you. And what I was always interested in television. So back in the day, it was black and white television, but I was always enamored and fascinated with television. You could probably in those days call me a TV addict, which I was called quite a few times as a child. And but I was predominantly fascinated by the storytelling and just how they made films. And whilst I think I was in second year of doing my diploma at Harare Polytechnic, there was a German film company that was doing a film in Zimbabwe, and they'd asked us to create a few of their props, quite big props for them, and so we embarked on that, and it was exciting, and it was using the skills that I was learning as a fine artist who was studying textiles, sculpture, design, printmaking, figure drawing, and what have you. So my foundation in terms of art was pretty tight, and now I could express it through the stuff that we were doing for film. And what ended up happening is that there was a young, I forget his name, he was one of Zimbabwe's first directors who was at the London Film School, and he was doing his final year piece, and UNESCO decided to help him out, and they did basically I went on a crash course for film, where in our first week we would look at all the different aspects of film, and what makes film, what makes film magical, and all the elements that go within storytelling. For instance, I think it was Chinatown, just like all black and white films, with Jack Nicholson. So we went from those two contemporary films. In our second week, we were introduced to all the different departments that go into film. So it was your sound, it was lighting, it was cinematography. And in our third week, we split up and decide which way we were going to go. And then we would do that, and within that week, we would break down the script of this final year student, and we shot his film. And that's where I caught the eye of the production designer that was working on that film at Treichgold. I think her name was Trudy Treichgold, I think her name was, and I started working besides on projects, on commercials, actually, first and foremost, in Zim at the time, and just an assistant helping out. Then I got onto a think it was a Carlton series, the channel Carlton in the UK. I think it was a derivative of ITV. I can't exactly place it. There was a film called Under the Sun, which was a 1930s detective series based in Kenya. But at the time, they couldn't shoot in Kenya because of they just bombed the US embassy, and so they decided to shoot in Zimbabwe, and we recreated the Happy Valley Kenya era there. And I was basically a driver at that point, but I'd worked my way up to set dresser assistant. And funnily enough, at that point, there was sort of the crew decided to leave to go and work on a local production. I think it was called Jacaranda at the time. And they wanted us all to, to jump ship basically and leave this production in its wake. And I decided not to do that because I prefer to see a production out, no matter what it takes. And that was my first kind of ethical decision when it came to filmmaking. And from there, they were so impressed with the way that I worked and what have you. I came to South Africa as a springboard to go to the States. I wanted to work in Hollywood. So I'd gotten a few, and that was probably about 2 years of continual work at that point. But because of my background, and my interest in watching television in a young age, it kind of all went together, and I picked up things really, really quickly and easily. And I was also, because of working in Zim, and you didn't have access to to a lot of resources, you ended up using what you had to create sculptures and what have you. And that was, that it all sort of amalgamated into steering me towards becoming a production designer. Then I I started working in South Africa on small jobs here and there. And I managed to work on a puppet series with a director named David Lister. There was Peak Viewing, was a company that was in South Africa at the time, and they did quite a few films for, I think, VHS or broadcast at the time. And I got into that, but and then kind of it became quite cliquey, getting into these into these spaces. And then my drive was sort of more to I started to get into music videos, doing a lot of music videos, and that led me to meeting people within a company called Rage, which was the first young black company to basically production company that were doing a lot of youth magazine shows for Channel O and for Take 5 at the time. I also had a stint on Take 5, so I did a lot of small jobs just to make ends meet, a lot of difficult jobs as well, but just kept at the grind, because what I wanted to do was I wanted to be an art director. And I worked on a show called On the Street for Channel O, where we had amazing opportunity to do these 45-minute documentaries on youth culture around Africa. And at the time, I was a researcher, so I just did whatever I could get my hands on. I did it. I would research. This was right in the beginning of the internet, so that kind of helped us a bit to reach out beyond our borders. And so I was researcher, I was camera assistant, I was, so it was kind of away from from art directing, but more in the lines of sort of directing, I would say. And then I got to see Africa, and it made me think that why would I want to go to the States and tell stories that relate to, you know, an American kind of perspective, when there were so many stories to tell here, and just the vibrancy of Africa and the colorful cultures that you find all over the place, because there's so many different cultures. And each culture has got their story. So I decided to stay in South Africa. And Yizo Yizo was a big show at the time, which I think everybody would have wanted to have worked on. But there was a counterpart to that. It was called Gazlam, which was about a sort of coming of age of rural youth moving into the city, and the lifestyle, you know, sort of living in Yeovil or Hillbrow, and it was, you know, it pertained to drugs. It pertained at the time, HIV was a big thing at the time, the sort of narrative of HIV, and so all of those kind of played a part in the, you know, in the narrative. From there, I was still doing music videos on the side, so on weekends. So I really had my heart in it, and it was quite, you know, if you're single, it's quite a good job to have. And I eventually ended up at, after knocking on their door quite a bit, or actually they'd seen me with the bomb shelter who I work with right now, who I've been with for about almost 20 years now. But the thing about BOM is they tell African narrative stories, and so I really felt at home here, and I've done a variety of shows, and you can imagine we've pretty much been busy the whole way through. Then we started a commercial section, and I headed up with Tebogo Maklatsi, who produced and directed the Yizo Yizo. We started doing commercials, which is a very different world, very corporate, but it gave me a very good scope in terms of the two worlds. And to end up now with doing Shaka Ilembe, which is a 12-part series based on the life of Shaka, but telling it from before he was born, so that you understand the political and cultural and sort of how can I put it, sort of structures within what we call them kingdoms, because we don't like using the word tribe, and it's become, you know, it's a huge success. And I would say that if I were to, you know, God forbid, pass away tomorrow, I'd be quite happy with having done that, because I've managed to tell a really historical and very important African story from an African perspective, which is, I think, very important, in vernacular, and hopefully the rest of the world will get to see it, and also just see the skill set that South Africa has to offer.
So thanks for that really wonderful journey, because I think it's so common to hear people who've established in the sector, like you are, who've come through many different departments, worked in many different fields of the industry. You didn't just go in as the artist that you were. You could have just honed it very closely to art direction and being, you know, set design and so on. And what's fascinating to me is how often I hear, and we all hear, that being able to work in, or having worked in multiple parts of the value chain, you get to understand how the industry works, and you get to understand better, you know, what your role in it is. And so I just wanted to pause on that comment to say, you know, for a young filmmaker coming in who's got a very clear vision, I'm a director, I'm a cinematographer, I'm a scriptwriter, or I'm a production designer, I'm an art director, would you advise that they try and work in different parts of the industry before settling into what is their passion and their core competence?
No, totally. I mean, it's a bit of a conundrum for me at the moment when I think about the academic side of getting into film compared to the on the ground experience. I think that I feel that there's a huge disconnect at the moment. For instance, when I did that, I think that UNESCO project was hugely valuable, because you go in wanting to make film. You don't go in wanting to, I mean, you kind of have an idea of where you want to go. But within those first few weeks where you're learning about other departments, it really gives you a good sense of what it takes. Because at the end of the day, you're all on set. You've got to know what the lighting person wants to get out of, to achieve, because the lighting person wants to achieve, your gaffer just wants to achieve just as much as you want to achieve, and they're focused on that. And you're all fitting into a space that when everything falls into place, and those are not very often, you don't very often get that time that I'm talking about when they fall into place. But when everything falls into place, that's where the magic happens, and that magic could be a few seconds or a minute of a scene, but you walk away from that knowing, okay, this is why I do the job. This is why I'm passionate about doing the job. And it's when all of those come together. So just to get back to your point, I would highly recommend being in all different departments, and we've studied in institutions who come out and say, I'm a production designer. And I have to tell them, I'm sorry, you're not. When you go study medicine, you don't come out going, I'm a doctor. You've got to go through, the rings in order to understand what it actually takes to be a doctor. And it's the same thing for production design, because it is. I'm a production designer, and I'm like, okay, so where do you get your props and what have you from and whatever? Yeah. So you're not even a props master yet. You know what I mean? And a props master in itself is a huge role, because you as a person have to understand your characters fully. And if you don't immerse yourself into a whole lot of different worlds, you're going to be very one-lined. A cell phone isn't a cell phone until you know what the character's financial dynamics are. Would they have an Android compared to an Apple phone? And once you put those, just as minute as that may seem, onto screen, it helps the viewer absorb the character that they're watching and believe it, because that's what we're trying to do at the end of the day, is make the viewer believe this world. You've got to immerse them. And like just with Shaka right now, when I meet people and I'm saying, my first words to them were you entertained? Yes, we were entertained. Fantastic, I've done my job. Were you transported? Yes, I was totally transported. Then I know I can walk away and go, well, then we've done a job. I mean, it could have been a case where it was like, I saw that you used, brand new contemporary beads and what have you, and I've seen them in China Mall, for instance. You know what I mean? And then you've broken that you created a barrier between the viewer and the screen, which you want to suck them in. It's just like when you're reading a well-written book, you sucked into that book. To come out of it is really difficult. You're doing the same with visuals.
Well, Dylan,
so I would say,
I think we can all say we're really happy we didn't lose you to Hollywood, and that Africa
Yeah,
got in your blood and you
I'm
stayed.
very happy there.
And that I'm sure, and I'd love to hear, just for the last comment, you know, post Shaka, what is the next big project on your horizon? I know you said you could die happy now, but you know, you're still a young man. So what is driving Dylan for the future post Shaka?
Well, I'm working on a psychological thriller at the moment, written by a local author, and the book has been adapted to television, and so once again we kind of keeping it within our well, it's my case in point. Local stories that are being told are now being put onto to screen, and adaptations, and I feel that as our industry kind of progresses, I think we're going to be seeing a lot more of that. But what Shaka's done, I think, is it's opened the doors now to telling stories from the past. There's so many sort of historical stories that I don't think have been told, and also told from a different perspective, because colonialism had worked so well. Like, you know, it's an amazing feat. It works so well. Even with Shaka, we had to really read between the lines, because all these books that we're reading and theses were written from a white perspective, from a European perspective. And it doesn't matter if you were born here or what have you, there's still sort of a perspective. I mean, I'll give you an example. When I first started on Shaka, we were doing the pilot, and I was looking at the photographs, and I was looking at what pregnant women, and I didn't know that there were pregnant women at the time, would wear. They would wear small buckskins that they would use basically as an apron to sort of identify the fact that they were in a pregnancy stage. It would be their uniform, so to speak. And just even looking at the black and white pictures of the time, I couldn't figure out certain things, so I made it up in my mind. And I feel that was it's that perspective that they took, that, you know, that I'm talking about, that if you're not indulging deeply into the culture, and not just taking it verbatim, and you understand the processes of why things were made the way they were, or hold on a second, I think that they're made like this, but it doesn't make any sense to me. Why would they do it? What were they thinking at the time? So it's like you really got to immerse yourself in that. But just getting back to the point is that digging deep like that, and trying to figure out the psychological and sociological things of the time, is that you can now pinpoint and tell African stories that wouldn't necessarily be the stories that people would think that they were. So what it does is it opens up a new world. Even if you go into fantasy, it opens up a new world. And I think that's really important right now. And hopefully there will be, the floodgates are open, and this is where we will see ourselves.
Well, thank you, Dylan, so much for sharing your experience, your knowledge, your insights, and the importance of research, and, the role that universities could be playing to support the sector going forward. I think we at the African Hub for Sustainable Creative Economies, we're really looking at how universities can better support the sector going forward. And I think the things you've told us about the deep insight, the archives, the importance of research, the importance of understanding culture deeply, to tell the story authentically.
Yes.
So thank you so much for your time and your knowledge.
Most welcome. Most welcome.